Hello, this is Steve at Sparky's Answers, and what we're looking at here is the fresh air recirculation door actuator out of a 1997 Chevrolet Tahoe. The reason why the vehicle was brought in is because whenever you turn the key on or off, there'd be a loud thumping sound for up to about 2 minutes, and then the noise would come back sometimes going down the road too. And the noise is generally a thump, 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 thump. Quite annoying, and it's pretty darn loud. And it would seem like because the functionality of the system appears to be relatively normal except for the noise, that you shouldn't even really worry about it. And some people would be tempted to just disconnect it, and I probably would too, depending on where it was stuck and what time of year it is. The two big problems that you run into are that if this actuator is broke and the door is stuck in the full fresh air position during the heat of summer, the air conditioner will not be able to overcome the heat and humidity of the outside air, and the inside of the cabin is going to feel not so great, especially during the heat of the day. At night or something, it'd probably feel all right. It just wouldn't be as cold and crisp as it should be. But the bigger issue is if it's stuck in the full recirculation position, and particularly during the winter, you're driving down the road and you're not getting any fresh air into the cabin. You have the heat on, you start driving in the evening, you get sleepy, you run off the road and hit a tree, and you could die. I mean, it doesn't seem like that big of a deal just listening to the noise and looking at this little part for the air conditioner, but it is actually quite an important part. What we're going to do is take a look at the inside of this thing to pull this last little screw out. Take the cover off. And this gear right here, I'm going to take and pull it up, bring it up closer to the camera. And you should be able to see that tooth is broken and missing out of there, and the one kind of next door to it, one over, is bent and is about to break off anyway. So there's several of them there that are damaged, and just those few little teeth being damaged is what causes that thing to go thunk, 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 because it gets to a point and it just slips and it won't mesh. It's kind of like having a broken tooth on a zipper. It just won't work. Well, anyways, after this we're going to start the procedure on actually changing out the actuator and what tools I had to use. The main tool I use to change this actuator out is a snap-on 1/4 inch flex head ratchet with a 5.5 millimeter socket. The one screw at the bottom is fairly easy to get to, and hopefully you can see that right there. And I'm on it, and then you can just take it in and out. There's a good bit of room to work. The other screw though is further up this way, and arm lengths dictate that you can't really access it from this end with your ratchet, so you have to take the ratchet and go up through the glove box opening and go to the back side over the top of the heater AC box. And what that allows you to do, and of course I had to do it with my right hand, but what it allows you to do is to operate the ratchet with your right hand through the top side of the hole, and then you can support it with your left hand and keep it on the screw heads to where you can get the screw in and out without too much trouble. It is a little bit of a pain in the rear, but it's not too bad. The ones that were a little bit worse were, and like I said, this was a 1997. If you go back a couple of years, GM put the computer right on top of the blower motor with the bracket and everything in the way. Really makes it quite a bit more difficult. And if I remember right, the screw heads were a 7 millimeter head back then, and for some reason that just made it even worse too. But right now I've got the actuator back in there. The thunking problem is gone, and now I've got to put all this stuff back in that somebody else took apart because they didn't know exactly how to fix it. Okay, I'm going to put the blower motor back in and put the glove box back in. Hopefully all this will show up well enough. hopefully I don't have to go back and forth and get more tools than what I brought out here. And if you noticed, there's a flat section on there. I rotated it up to where it'll clear this bar, and then once it's up in there, you rotate it around and line it up, put that tube back on, and then your bolt hole should mostly line back up. Something you ought to realize too, whenever you got screws going into plastic, you always rotate them a little bit to the left. You get it started first, find the hole. Rotate it around a little bit to the left until you feel it drop and click in, and then spin it back right. That's because these screws have self-cutting threads, and if you don't take that one little step to line up with the original threads that were cut in there, you're going to cut a second set of threads, and it's going to strip the plastic out. And of course, sometimes it's easier said than done. There we go. But like I said, if you just make that one little turn to the left, well, you got a little light pressure on it, and you feel it raise up and then click and drop in. Then you can turn it back to the right, and it'll go in there and it won't strip anything out. And the ones that we can put in with the cordless driver, we will. And I did cheat and kind of lined the head up half cockeyed to get those ones that were a little bit out of the way. Just go back in a little snug with the ratchet. And I'm going to have to get a wrench to put on that to finish tightening it. But the purple wire goes to the insulated terminal with the rubber boot. That's your power wire. Make sure it snaps on. The black wire will go to the ground side of it, which is the bare metal terminal that's bolted to the side of the case. And it should click right on there. And what I generally do is I'll turn the blower motor on and let it run for a while, make sure the terminals aren't getting warm. And that way we can be sure that we have a good solid contact with the wires, because I didn't take it apart and I don't know what skill set was used to do it, so I'd rather make sure that they're good and snug and won't give any heat problems. But it just takes a few minutes of running it and we should be able to see what it does. I'll be back in a minute to tidy it up. Okay, invariably somebody else took this apart and I didn't. I'm putting it back together afterwards, and I didn't see this piece until I had it almost all the way back together. So those two wires I was telling you about, I've got to take them back loose, slip this up in the hole, get it positioned, and then reinstall those wires. This thing is usually a little bit of a pain to get right up in there right. It's got to go between so many things. Usually by the time I find these covers, they're already tore up into several pieces, so at least whoever took it apart, they did take the time not to destroy anything, which is always a plus. To the right, that's hanging up on something. Let's see now. Yeah, that's lining up. I can see the two terminals just going over the one lock there. I've got to reach over and put this over the piece that it goes down on. There you go. And that's secured. So all that's in place. And what I'm going to do, seeing how I've got this back out, I'm going to go ahead and take these terminals out and tighten up the spring tension on them, so I don't have to worry about them anymore. They weren't heating up, but they didn't feel that tight either, particularly when I took them back loose. So what I do is I take the terminal out of the housing and then I stick a little scribe up in the slot, being careful not to stab myself, and bend the spring tension back out on it, because what you don't want is you don't want a lot of daylight between this spring tab and those little side holders. So that one's done. I got to bend the locking tab back out and put the insulator back on. Snap, snap. And now I gotta take the black one off and do the same thing to it. Stick a screwdriver up in the hole, push the flat in, pull the insulator off. And I don't know if you can see that in the camera or not, but it's compressed quite a bit there, because you should be able to see a good bit of air right in that hole. And what it is it's just got too much slop in there. So we'll take and do the same thing. Work it in, bend it out. Do it the other direction to make it pretty even. And there, it's all nice and snugged up again. Now the only problem is that when you go to put it back on, it's going to be a little bit harder to put on, which is a little bit inconvenient, but it's going to make for a better job, and you won't have to come back in here and replace the blower motor in 3 months because the terminals are all burnt out on it. So I'm going to slip this one, the black one, down through here. Looks like it just goes better that way. Try and get the angle right. Also on this ground, there's a tab that sticks off the side of the male terminal, and it lines up with the slot that has the slot is right there and has this lock that goes over it, so you have to make sure that's aligned to that side.
It's a pain in the patootie, but it makes it for a better job when you do it right. And when you have it on there, you should feel it click in. And then when you go to pull it off, try to pull it off without pushing that lever, it won't pull off because it's got it latched in place. And just double check it and make sure it's all on there snug. And also make sure there's not a lot of strain on the wire terminal to where it's putting tension on the spring in that spring terminal. The wires are pretty substantial, so if you have too much of an incorrect bend on it, it's going to keep tension pulled on it. And as a result, every time it vibrates, it shocks it, hammers it back a little bit, and eventually gets looser and looser until it stops working. And there's one more piece down here that I forgot to do, and I hope I can still do it. Well, I would try to still do it, but they broke that piece off the bottom when they took it off. There's a pin that's supposed to latch down there, and I can't make it latch because the pin is broken. I ain't know what you can do about that. Now for the glove box, you have to lay it back fairly substantial, get it in the slots there, get it to ride up, and it clicks just fine. And now you just push the sides in, come back here and get this hinge and slide it in the slot, and that's that. Now the bad news is I got 2 screws left over. Now I got to try and figure out where to go. Joy, joy, joy. Oh, and tightening up the screws up in the corner behind the bracket, even though it's 5.5 millimeter 7/32 wrench, which is part of an old ignition wrench that I got, is perfect for going on there. So, I guess I get to take the glove box back out and see if there's screws that held that panel on at the other end. Joy, joy, joy. Let's see, I know there's no screw hole there, none there. No threads there. So what did they take the screws out of? They took the screws out of here and here. You don't need to take those out. Why would you want to take those out? That one right there, you got to be a little bit careful because there's a wiring harness right behind it. We don't want that screw to cut right into it, which it could if you weren't careful. We'll try this again. At least the glove box is easy on this year model to work with. Some cars are a royal pain in the patootie to take the glove box out. This isn't one of them. Yeah, much firmer with those two screws in there. And that's a wrap. Yeah, let's crank it up, make sure it still works. Oh yeah, blower's working just fine. I checked it earlier, the fresh air door's working just fine. So just pick the tools up and this one's a wrap.